So hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Adrienne Allard Wong, and I'll be moderating this session along with fellow Northwest eLearn board member Nina Fox. And this is Online Discussion Forums, Strategies for Designing Inspired Prompts with Kim Carter-Cram and Jennifer Black. They'll tell you a little bit more about themselves when we get started, but first, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, feel free to audibly interrupt or message in the Zoom chat. This session will be recorded and will be made available in our conference website once it is done being captioned. The speaker slides will also be available from our conference website. We'll also post them in the chat. I think we'll be posting them a little bit later on in the session. And finally, we want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, HonorLock, for helping us make this conference possible. HonorLock is all about humanizing online proctoring. If you want to chat with them, feel free to head over to their channel in our conference Slack, and we'll put a link to the chat in the chat. And now I'll hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you. So I want to introduce myself just briefly. My name is Kim Carter-Cram. I already know Crystal, but I don't know the rest of you, but welcome and thank you for coming. I work at Boise State University. Jen and I are both colleagues in the Department of English, and we teach a lot online. So Jen, maybe you can introduce yourself, and then maybe we can just go around since we're a small group and everybody just give us a little word of introduction, who you are, where you teach, or what you teach, or if you design, or what exactly your role is.
So as Kim said, I'm Jen Black. We are currently, we didn't start out in the same department, but we have landed in the same department. And we also both work as faculty associates with the Boise State eCampus Center, which focuses on all our online courses and online programs. So we work as faculty liaisons between the e-learning center of campus and the faculty. So we spend a lot of time talking about online learning and experimenting with things so that we have things to share. So let's hear, Jerry, would you introduce yourself first to us?
Sure. So I'm Jerry Lewis. I'm former director of e-learning at Columbia Basin College in Pasco, Washington. I retired at the end of June, so I'm retired now from that. But I am still, I'm still the Northwest eLearn treasurer, and I participate in the organizing the conference. Although I've been kind of derelict on a number of days because I was on vacation or traveling.
I think that's allowed.
Just this once, though.
Sheila, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. My name is Sheila Northrup, and I'm the instructional designer at Tacoma Community College.
Great, thank you.
I
Crystal.
also teach those, so.
Oh, great. Crystal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Crystal Nielsen. I am the instructional designer and technologist at Northwest Nazarene University in Nampa, Idaho. And I'm here. Actually, I just had my 6th anniversary of returning because I was at Boise State for 4 years and 8 years here before that.
Has it been that long that you've been over there?
6 years.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I know.
Wow. We loved working with you, so it's nice to see you again. Greta, do you want to introduce yourself to us?
Sure. I'm the new postdoc scholar at Oregon State University's eCampus. So I'm helping out with their ongoing research projects and really jazzed to be here this week.
Wonderful. Thank you. Heather, how about you?
I'm Heather Ryan. I'm the Director of Student Learning Assessment at South Puget Sound Community College. And before that, I was an English faculty member for about 15 years. And a lot of my work ends up being instructional design or overlapping with that for folks.
Yeah, great. Well, great that you have that to pull on and get to bring those different experiences together. Jody, can you introduce yourself to us? And I don't know if everybody is at a point where that they can participate. So if you don't respond, it is okay. Jody, go ahead.
Hi, I am Jody White. I am faculty at Highline College.
Great,
What do you
thank you.
teach?
I teach in the education department, so I teach teaching, a little meta, and I'm also the faculty in residence for our educational technology.
Very cool, great. Jess, what about you? Can you introduce yourself to us?
Sure. I am Jess Johnson, and I have a dog here who is barking. Um, and I do continuing medical education programs for UW's Prevention Training Center.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Munib, I know you just joined us. We're just asking people to introduce themselves really briefly and tell us sort of who they are coming into this workshop.
Yes, I'm an instructional technologist at Central Washington University.
Great.
Managed campus.
Well, it's nice to have all of you with us. If you have questions or comments or things to say, we would much rather that you raise your hand or just speak up rather than put things in chat or chat privately. We would like this to be interactive to the extent possible. So please feel free to talk, okay? With that having been said, I wanted to share a few thoughts about online discussion forums. And you can read some of these tweets and some of these posts. My favorite is probably the one up here by Liv Howard at the top. A student, I love bread. And the response, Joe, I agree with you. I love bread. I liked the part when you said you love bread. Great point. And if you've ever seen this kind of post, the math one also there by Jared is fairly similar. Jim, 2 + 2 = 4. Wow, Jim, I totally agree. I like how you added the 2's together and got 4. Very insightful. If this sounds like discussion boards that you have seen in the past or responses that you have seen in the past, you're not alone. We're sorry, and we're going to try to help. So with that, Jen.
So want to just first think about what a bad discussion looks like. And so this is a place where you can use the chat if you want, or you can just unmute and speak. Like what do you think the characteristics of a bad discussion are?
This is Heather. I really dislike when the requirement is like a mini essay, because when I'm scrolling online in social media, I never want to read an essay. That's not the place where I want to read a block of text.
Yeah,
so
and I think,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just feel like it encourages people students not to read.
Yes, yeah. And so I think that that issue of audience, so that's one of the things that's a characteristic of a bad discussion is unclear sense of audience. Are the students writing for the teacher or students writing for each other? And a lot of times when they're writing for the teacher, then they tend to write more than their classmates want to read. Krista, what were you going to say?
I was going to say a discussion prompt that's basically just a yes or no kind of question.
Yeah. What is 2 + 2? Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And we see that a lot in discussion prompts because you think, I'm a teacher, I'm going to ask them, do they know the material, right? So what is 2 + 2? Discuss.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, in our capacity as faculty associates, we've worked with a lot of new online faculty, and I've often heard them say, I've tried discussion boards and they don't work. I tried them, my students hated them, I hated them, they don't work. And so then my next question is always what you did. And so Munib, your point there, lack of interaction from discussion from the instructor. So Kim, let's go through these points. So some characteristics of a bad discussion: the students aren't engaged. They're checking this off on a list of things to do, but they don't care about it and they don't see the value of it. Okay. The posts tend to be repetitive. And so, what can students say when everyone is saying 2 + 2 = 4, right? That there's no conversation. So it leads to no meaningful discussion between students because the same things happen and over. Only a few students get really involved. Maybe those I had a student once who said, I'm far enough in my education that I don't have to worry if I'm not gonna finish college. So now I can do what I want in these discussions. And it was actually great because she felt like she didn't have to be constrained by some of those expectations that other people might have for themselves. A lot of times the posts don't address the instructions, especially if the instructions aren't very clear. So I was talking to a faculty member this week, and she was talking about how mad she was that students just weren't reading the instructions. And so, kind of asking, well, where are your instructions? And what, and it turned out there was a huge block of text that students were supposed to sift through. And so students weren't addressing the instructions, and then they did the bare minimum to check this off their list of things to do. Because they're in an online class, that's what you do. Neither the students nor the instructor enjoy it. It's a necessary evil because we really just don't know what else to do.
And we always hear we're supposed to do discussions in our online classes, and then the students end up hating it, you end up hating it, and you kind of want to hit yourself over the head and say, why the heck did I do this? So why do you think discussions fail? What causes them to fall apart and not work? And I don't have my chat open, so if you can just like talk, that'd be great.
I've got the chat open too, so if you type there, I can read it up.
I have 40 windows open instead, so I don't need a 41st.
So what makes those things happen? What makes it not engaging, or people just doing it as a checklist, or people hating it? Let's diagnose the cause of the problem.
I think it's bad prompts. Like I teach communication studies, and when I do my 101 class, because I have a wide variety of students who aren't necessarily familiar with how to do this, I give them a topic to discuss, right? And then I ask for their opinions and those kinds of things. But as I get further up in my courses, one of the things I just ask them is, tell me what hit you this week, like in our reading or in our videos or whatever it was that we did this week. What was valuable for you, right? Because when I teach communication, what I need for my students to know is that I'm teaching them skills that are valuable for them. And so I'm not trying to get out that specific, like 2 + 2 is 4. Of the skills you learned about this week when we were discussing communication, what was valuable for you, right? And a lot of the time, I think instructors are not, they're not trusting that students know themselves well enough to apply the material in a way that's meaningful.
I think that's really important, actually, because it is, and I think that speaks to this idea of students being connected to the assignment and to the, like you said, the meaning behind it. Why are they doing this? What is the objective for doing this in the first place? Which is very important. And if it's not clear to students, then they sort of disconnect from it and they step back and they say, why even bother? What am I doing this for?
Yeah, so if they feel like there's no room for them. And I think actually your comment, Sheila, makes me realize that a lot of times what causes online discussions to fail are the same things that cause in-person discussions to fail. We just are more used to that. So, if you think of the Ferris Bueller's Day Off example of the teacher who's trying to lead an online discussion by asking leading questions that have a single right answer, it's not effective as a discussion, but it's so much more obvious in an online forum because the teacher can't just go on with their lecture. So I think it's not necessarily like, oh, we're really good at face-to-face discussions, but we can't do it online. I think it just exposes a weakness that many instructors have not learned how to do really meaningful discussions in general.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? What causes discussions to fail? Crystal?
So I thought of another one, and that is, there are pros and cons to this, but professor doesn't have enough, it doesn't grade the discussion at all, or give such little points or part of the, weighting the grade that students don't have the incentive to join in. Like I said, there's pros and cons to grading a discussion forum, but some kind of incentive is really needed, I think. So I had a person this year who wanted to make the entire course worth 100 points. And so some items only had 1 point attached to them. And I said, points are free. Just make it 1,000 points. And that way it feels like there's a little bit more at stake, even though it's still the same percentage. But, anyway.
That's a really good point. If you don't feel like what you're doing counts for anything, then why do it? If you're only going to get 1 point, even if it is 1% of your final grade or 10%, I mean, see how I math there? Aren't you impressed with me, Jen? So, but I mean, if it doesn't feel like it counts, then students they're not gonna bother, because you're right, they're gonna deal with the lowest hanging fruit, the highest point value stuff right? And not the other things.
Right. And I think that, that motivation can be extrinsic. And it's going to be, especially at the beginning of a discussion of a course. What I love is that as the course goes on, when the students start to say, I always go look for your post to a classmate, or, I can't wait to see what you're going to say. And then it starts to move that motivation from extrinsic to intrinsic. They want to be in the discussion because they care about what their classmates are going to say. And so for me, that's a mark of, okay, I've started doing what we need to do in this class, because yes, the points are important, but they have other reasons to be there as well. So we've broken this down into a few different categories. So Jess says fear of being first and failing. Yeah, I think that's, a lack of clarity about what is expected. And so that could make it really scary.
The other, I'm going to just follow up. Sorry, I clicked twice. But the other thing is some people post at the last minute. They post at 11:58 on Sunday when it's due at 11:59. There is no discussion going to happen there. Literally nothing is going to change. I mean, if you post then, you can't interact with anybody. You've just checked the box. It's not met its purpose at all. Also, related to that perhaps is the idea that students are writing to the instructor. And this is what you were saying, Jen, right? Writing to the instructor instead of to each other. They're not engaging in the class and in the material. They're just checking a box. And that makes a huge difference. And also talk about, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I piggyback on that really quick?
Yeah, absolutely, go ahead.
A lot of folks, and I certainly did this early in my teaching career, where I wasn't fair in the grading or evaluation because I wanted them to talk to each other, but then I was like, if they weren't formal enough, or if they got some things, wrong or less correct, I would maybe grade them down. So like also being really clear on how you're evaluating, like if it's writing for you as a professor, that's a different level than the writing for each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and we'll talk about some strategies around this as well, but I think one of the, when students are required to post and then reply to people that responded to them, a lot of times students are like, no one responded to me. And then a lot of times the reason no one responded to them is because they were writing to the instructor. They wrote a 1,000 word treatise on something instead of the 200 words, so it's nice to go above and beyond, but yeah, just a lack of clarity about what this is for, what this is supposed to be.
I tell my students that people won't respond if they do more than a paragraph. Like I tell them deliberately to keep it short for that reason.
Right. Yeah. Depending again on what the conversation is and what the parameters of it are. Yeah.
Yeah, and what the objectives of it are. Because I mean, it might have been you, Sheila, who said earlier too, that people don't read social media posts that are long. They just skip over that. They want to read the tweet length posts, right? So because they can take that in. You can read that in a second in one eye without having to and it's a lot easier. Yeah. People get lazy, maybe, I don't know. I think another thing that to be careful of and that can cause discussion boards to fail is a deadline that's not in the right place, right? Either the conversation drags on too long, you don't need weeks and weeks of it, or maybe it ends right when it's getting into the good stuff, right? And like you guys have already mentioned, being disconnected and this idea of not connecting with the assignment with what the course is all talking about, or an unclear purpose. That is, students don't know why they're doing this, what benefit it has for them. So this goes a little bit to what you were saying before, Crystal. Okay, so I wanted to look at these discussion prompts. Jen's going to talk about them a little bit, but why are these less than effective?
I'm going to read some of them to you. Post an initial response to this discussion, sharing the main ideas from this module and your thoughts about them, then respond to 2 of your classmates' posts. How do our bodies maintain homeostasis? What kinds of figurative language are illustrated in Alice in Wonderland? How is behavioral interviewing used to screen job candidates? Summarize the 4 levels of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. So I think these have a lot of different problems, but what are the problems that why might these not lead to meaningful conversation?
What if I'm not sure what the main idea from the module was?
Yeah, so that goes to that point earlier about the fear of being first and doing something wrong that Jess pointed out, right? So that, I'm not going to take a stab at this because what if I say something that's not a main idea or I show my own ignorance? Okay, great. What else?
A lot of these are things that are either going to be right or wrong. Like, how do our bodies maintain homeostasis? And so they're not necessarily great places for discussion.
Yeah, like what can you discuss about how our bodies maintain homeostasis? I mean, there's an explanation, and then what?
Exactly, right. And so like Jody just pointed out, they're just regurgitating information. And again, even if the instructor thinks, oh, I want students to talk about this, the questions themselves don't suggest that the instructor wants students to talk about them. Yeah, so like Munib's saying, they don't prompt a discussion between students. They feel evaluative. And sometimes and often we do use discussions as a way of assessing student learning. But when they are framed in a way that feel like students are being tested rather than a safe, flexible space for students to explore ideas, then it's scary for students and it's boring for everybody.
There are only so many ways that you can explain how the body maintains itself in homeostasis. And then you end up with great ideas, Joe. I really like how you explained how the body maintains itself in homeostasis. I totally agree. Which is not a substantive reply to anything.
My body also maintains homeostasis, yeah.
Right. So we've been there, right? Creating effective online discussions is not easy. It's not intuitive. So the question is, what can we do about this? First thing is to start with your objectives. When you're looking at your discussion questions and you're working on creating them, what are the learning objectives for the course and the module, right? When you break it down from the big course learning objectives to the smaller module learning objectives, you can really start to think, well, what do I want them to take away from this? What do I want them to be able to do or be able to know at the end of this module or course or whatever? And how can a discussion help them achieve those goals? And then what do I need to do to be able to create that discussion to facilitate that happening?
And just one thing I want to throw in there is that sometimes when people are running learning objectives, they create objectives that say, by the end of this module, students should be able to discuss X. And like, well, actually, them discussing it should not be the goal, right? And unless you are going to teach them how to discuss things, it would be great, but that's not usually what happens, right? So thinking, okay, discussion is the means toward an end. What is that end? By the end of this discussion, what should they be able to do or understand? And then how is the discussion going to lead them there? So discussion cannot be, have I said that enough different ways? Discussing is not the outcome.
Right. You can't really measure discussing. How well does one discuss something? You can measure understanding. You can measure, a lot of other things, but measuring discussing is difficult. Right? So when you're thinking about the discussion questions, thinking about how participating in the discussion is going to help them achieve their objectives is very important. And also, how is discussing going to create some social and cognitive presence for your students? In other words, how are your students going to know each other more from this discussion? How are they going to be present intellectually in this discussion? Part of a class is not just teaching the material, but also creating a learning community so that people know and trust each other so that they can put their idea out there and without fear of being ridiculed or mocked that it's wrong and not the main idea of the module or whatever. You want people to be able to take risks, and being able to take risks involves creating a sense of community where people can feel safe to do so. Anything else anybody want to say about that one? Okay.
So one of the answers to these problems is creativity. Even though many of us have been teaching online for a long time, most of us still have not had as much experience with online learning as with the years and years of in-person schooling that we had growing up and through our education. And so this requires some thinking outside of our experience. and also just trying new things. So we're going to break this down into 4 categories. Creativity with the format of discussions, creativity with the prompts that you create within those formats, creativity with what you ask students to do when they respond to each other, and then creativity with your own participation in the discussions.
Which I just want to interrupt and say is super important. As an instructor, I kind of hate the people who say, I don't participate in the discussions. And I kind of want to just shake them and say, but you have to. And many people will say, yes, but I want to see what they're going to do by themselves. Well, they're going to say, I love that you added 2 and 2 together and made 4. What a great point. That's what they're going to say. If you're not there guiding and helping the discussion and moving it this way or that way, it's not going to fail, or it's going to fail, excuse me. So I think it's super important that instructors don't just like, it's off and running and walk away, because that doesn't work. So we want to talk about some different kinds of discussion board formats that can be a little bit more creative in terms of thinking about the format, which is the first of these 4 areas that we were just discussing. So some different ways that you can be creative with your format include things like doing case studies. You can always do a case study and involve conversation about that, or you can invite an expert in to talk to your students. What if you had the students pose questions to the expert and the expert then can reply and they can have an interplay back and forth? You can always do role playing, where students have the opportunity to play different parts of a story or different parts of a scenario in any kind of way. Peer reviews are a great way to get people involved and interacting with one another. So are debates. I love debates. I think they're really fun to do. And it forces people to think a little bit sometimes on outside of their comfort zone, because they don't want to take the position that they have been assigned sometimes. And so it really forces them to think about the other side of an issue. You can involve your students in facilitating the discussion. Why not let them take the lead, right? Circular response discussions or 3-layer discussions, or of course, always the traditional post and reply.
So let me explain a few of these, because some of these are not things that I had heard about when I first started learning how to teach online. So I think a lot of these make sense, case studies, and especially when there is a chance for students to choose between those cases or to work together on specific cases. So circular response is the idea that each student, when they come into the discussion, has to begin their post by responding to the student who posted before them, so that they are making sure that their post builds on the one right before, or the ones right before, right? Sometimes they're coming in quickly. So circular response says, I have to show that I've read what was posted before my post. I can't just ignore everybody else's stuff and come in. 3-layer discussion is students know that they're going to come back around and respond to the people that responded to them. So same sort of thing, that they know from the outset that there's going to be a back and forth in this conversation, not just a speaking and running away. And then obviously, even the traditional post once, reply twice kind of format can be effective depending on what you do with it. Any questions about any of these formats or additional formats you would like to add, or comments about what's on this slide before we move on? Okay, I'm taking that as a no.
Okay.
But again, feel free to put those into the chat, or to raise your hand, or just to speak at any time.
So the second of the 4 things we were talking about in terms of getting creative is being creative with prompts. So here we want to talk about some different things that we can do with the prompt itself. Jen.
Okay, so can you click let me see if that's okay. So first of all, creating open-ended questions. I think this is the one that we are most familiar with, but I think it's such a temptation to create questions that have a single right answer, even if we start them with why or how, right? So we might think, oh, I'm creating an open-ended question when I say, how does the body maintain homeostasis? Or what happens when you add 2 and 2, right? Like, oh, so really one good rule of thumb, I think, is asking questions that you don't already know the answer to as the instructor. And this can feel a little bit scary, I guess, but so application questions or, but especially questions like, and I think this was brought up a little bit earlier, questions about, what was your experience with this, or what was clearest and not clear to you. So we'll give some examples of things, but just making sure that the question allows for divergent thinking and it's not trying to get students to converge on the same answer. So questions that you care about, again, as an instructor, questions that you would like to know students' thoughts about. And I think, there's room for assessment and evaluation in discussion forums, but there also needs to be room for students to be individuals who have different thoughts. And so if I don't care what the students think about the post, then it's going to be hard for me to read it. So, I can't make myself, I can't make other people care, but I can think, well, what do I most want to know? And giving students choices, it can be really helpful when they have a few different things that they can choose from. So a few different prompts. Sometimes I'll even say, here are a few different prompts. And choice number 4 is, if none of these is interesting to you, make up your own prompt and answer it here. And again, not every student chooses that. That can be really scary. But if for a few students that say, I really wanted to talk about this aspect, that gives them that opportunity. I don't always do that, but once in a while. Connect those discussion prompts to the real world. So, school is the real world, of course, but to things outside of the classroom, to their lives, to things that they might be familiar with, to things that are going on right now, to their jobs. So many of our online students have, so the idea of especially adult learners, so many of them have experiences that they don't always feel are valued in the college classroom. And so we can make our discussion boards a place where they have some expertise because of the experiences that they've had and are able to see, that actually relates to something that we're talking about. I have seen this in action, or I've seen it when it doesn't happen in action. And then have some fun. My favorite discussion boards are the ones where I'm excited to see what students are going to say, and I'm surprised by their answers, and I get to be creative in my interaction with them as well.
100%. That's what we always want, right? Out of the discussions, is we want to be involved too. We're all, in that sense, learners in that classroom. So I want to give you a couple of examples of some more creative discussion prompts. We want to start with this first one, which is an example from a literature class, which reads, all of the readings for this unit deal with characters who feel trapped in one way or another. So for your initial post in this unit, I want you to write a Dear Abby or Dear Therapist style of letter from the perspective of one of the characters, male or female, in one of this week's texts asking for advice. Your letter should include some specifics from the story you choose, but also your own imagination about the character's specific thoughts and feelings. Write the letter as if you are the character and the circumstances of the story are your real life. So there's no need to say my story or in the text I appear in or anything like that. And then with some instructions, the details you include should make it clear to us which character you're writing about and what you believe that his or her dilemma should be, at least 300 words. So I love this prompt, and this is Jen's prompt, because it's creative. It allows the students to step into the life of the character. And in order to do so, they really need to understand something about the character, their role in the story, their whatever the problem is that they're facing in the story, and how that problem was solved in the story, but maybe not well enough or in a way that is satisfactory. So this is a prompt that allows people to interact with each other. When they answer these Dear Abby or Dear Therapist letters, students can say, well, I would do this, or I would do that, and here's why. Or, in my case where I, lost all of my money, then this is what I did, or et cetera, et cetera. Jody has a question. She says, how are students instructed to respond to this? Jen, do you do a generic?
I have it on another slide, I think, but I'll just say it now in case I don't. So what they have to do this is a 3-level conversation. So they have to respond as a present day therapist. So, you've got, let me think of an example of someone, right? You've got, why is my head going blank right now? You've got Dante lying on the therapist couch, and he says, I just had the strangest experience. I felt like I was, going down to hell and seeing all the people that I know being punished. And so anyway, so in this particular thing that they're supposed to use their own experience. And so that goes along with them saying like, oh, I've been through something like that. So for instance, they read a story for this unit about a woman who seems to be suffering from postpartum depression, although it's written at a time where that's not really been identified. And a lot of them say, sounds to me like, or I went through something very like that myself, or, have you gone in for counseling? Maybe you need some medication. So they are able to pull on that. And then for the third level, and I'm sure I have this on a later slide, the third level, they have to come back and tell each other whether they tried the advice and whether it worked. So again, they have an assignment with each level of that. And I did have a student, the first time I used this prompt, who emailed me privately and said, I don't understand why you're having us do this. What's the point of this? And so we got to get into a really good conversation about, so this is from a literature class for non-literature majors. So it's mostly students who don't like English, who don't think they're good at English. And so we got a good conversation about, ways of reading literature, how you can connect with them, and, that trying on their experiences can teach you empathy. And so that student ended up, for his final project, actually ended up writing a whole series of letters and responses from characters because it clicked with him. And he said, oh my gosh, I've never thought of reading that way. I've never thought of reading as if these people really existed and their problems might be real. And so he was definitely a convert to them as the class went on.
What a great success story, right? I mean, you want students to walk away from a literature class and feel like, oh, there's a message here that could apply to me in literature. We'll look at another example here from a history class. In my online history course, I had students role play different perspectives on the bombing of Hiroshima. Oh, sorry, my bad. There we go. I had students role play different perspectives on the bombing of Hiroshima. For example, a reporter in Japan, an advisor to President Truman, a curator at the Smithsonian. They loved the assignment and it brought history to life for them, which is always important, but especially critical in online learning. What a great prompt. If I were in a history class and I had the opportunity to do this, as opposed to just, when did the bombing happen? What's the name of the plane? Who were the pilots? I mean, who cares? I can Google that. But if you want to involve them and engage them, what a great way to do this. Have them take on the role, a little bit like the Dear Abby letter, have them take on a role of a character who potentially could have lived and been a real person at the time, right? And what a great conversation that would be about the events and the actions and the reactions and the results of the actions in a history class. And a third example here is from a humanities class, which Jen and I both teach.
So this particular,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, yeah. I was just going to just talk through it. So this particular one, I'm noticing that a lot of our examples have some kind of role playing, but this one is, a committee that is giving awards, and it's mixing things from the text with things outside the text, right? So they have to go through the section of the course and choose 3 works to give awards to: a work of visual art, a work of music or literature, and then something that is not in the readings that they feel like also is worthy of an award. So that blending of course content with things from my own experience, especially for something really contemporary, gives them, it's empowering to them, and it makes it really interesting because I can't think of any time that I've had students use the same artwork for their personal award. It ends up being all across the board a chance for them, and I learn a lot from them because they're having to make connections between classwork and their expertise outside of class.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any comments on any of these so far? Okay, in terms then of your responses as an instructor or facilitator in the course, consider using this 3 C's in the Q method.
And this
right?
is actually for students.
Okay, so but it can be either way. I mean, right? Because it could be a compliment, a comment, connect, and then a follow-up question. for the instructor or for the students. So the 3 C's are complement, comment, and connect, and then the Q is the question, right? You could ask them to take on a new role, and as we talked about, the therapist or the devil's advocate, a potential client, to give a summary and extend it, so that they not only have to summarize what someone else has said in a post, but then add to it a little bit what the humanities example just was doing, where we're adding something to it. And if you say, oh, I see that you've chosen these pieces, did you consider this other piece? And I would add this because blah blah blah, right?
Yeah, so I actually give my students this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the C3Q method. I was not for a really, really long time. This is a new discovery for me. But if, there's a lot of information about it online. I give my students, a handout with this on it. And so many of them have thanked me, like, oh, finally, I know what to do in my discussion responses, because all I knew to say before was, I like bread too, and I like how you said you like bread. So that does give them a lot of direction, but with a lot of space within it. And then the summary and extension kind of goes along with circular response to say, this is what I've seen so far, and this is a direction that I can go. So on the next slide is actually the rest of that literature discussion, where students are asked to give specific and sincere advice to each other, and then that third level of response. And this kind of 3-level response with specific instructions for each level can be really effective in all kinds of classes. It makes you have to read what people say to you, I think, especially, which that's part of the reason that those discussions often feel so pointless, is because you're just checking the box, and you can with almost 100% certainty know that the person you're writing to is not going to read what you said. And so for that third part, it's less important to me what they say than the fact that they had to read what someone said to them and respond to it.
Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay.
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
I'm kind of wondering how you grade these in terms of complete. Are there points assigned? How are you linking these to the learning objectives of your course? So if you have a few minutes to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So first of all, a very detailed rubric that is available to the students before they start the discussion. And depending on the discussion, right? So for this particular discussion, there's all the normal things that you would expect of timeliness, having these levels spread throughout the module so that there's enough time in between for them to read and respond to each other. But also for this one, well, for most of the discussions in this literature class, that you use specific examples from the reading. So even in something creative like this, if I or the classmates can't tell which text or character you're writing about, that you're not going to earn a very high grade on that. So it depends, Jody. It sometimes is multi-week. In a 15-week course, I could do this over the course of 2 weeks. In a summer course, I've done it within a week. But still, having 3 deadlines within a week, that's a fair amount, I think, for a regular semester course. So yeah, most of my discussions end up being 2 weeks in the regular semester or a week in a compressed course. But I do have a really clear, detailed, I hope clear, but detailed discussion board rubric for them to use. And also I participate in the discussion so I can nudge them a little bit if I see, a really vague, sometimes students will try like, oh, I haven't actually read the readings, but I think I could write something like, hey, I feel really trapped. What should I do about being so trapped? They try to think they can just use the prompt. So anyway, that's the main thing. Sometimes though, I think that it is okay to say, this discussion is based just on participation. I really want you to feel free. So I think that can be adjusted depending on the goals of the conversation. One of my learning objectives is that they are familiar with a variety of texts from different times and periods. And so this ties it into that. And that's not the verb that I use, but that they can explain the plot and characters of those things. So that ties into that learning objective.
And so not to go get too much into the weeds about this, but suppose you have a student on these 3 level assignments. Suppose you have somebody who nobody responds to their particular post. I mean, how, as an instructor, do you try to nudge that around?
So I
Reply.
have some instructions for that, because I do this 3-level discussion throughout the course. That the rule is always, if no one has responded to your post, you can just respond to 2 more people. But I also try to go into the discussion, and that's going to get into our next point. But when I go into the discussion, I look first. I go in right, after, at the same time students are going in, and I see, okay, who doesn't have any responses? So at least they get a response from me, and then they can respond back. But they also know, oh, if I don't get 2 responses, I can always just do another. I can go be someone else. I can respond to the advice that they got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to say as I reply. I always start by replying to the people who don't yet have a response to their post. And then, as Jen knows, I keep a pretty detailed spreadsheet of all of the students in my class with various information, including every week who I've replied to and not, so that I make sure that I kind of spread the love evenly. I don't want someone to feel like they're being jumped on all the time. And conversely, I don't want someone to get to the end of a 15-week semester and say, wow, she never even read and replied to my post. So, yeah. So, which is a nice segue into the last point we wanted to make of the 4, and that is creativity with our participation as instructors. I think it's important not to reply to every post. And the reason I think that's important is because if you reply as an instructor every post, then I feel like I fear that students will feel like you're just waiting to pounce on them and jump on them and like, ugh. And they'll be hesitant to reply. Whereas because you're replying to everybody, it just feels like, oh, she's watching for me. I think it's important to use people's names when you're replying. Ah, Jen, great idea. I loved this. Did you ever think about that? Or, whatever, right? Did you also take drugs or did you just rip the yellow wallpaper off the wall? Whatever, I don't know. So if you need to reframe this discussion, if people are going off track and they're just going like south with the conversation, you as the instructor can bring it back, right? You can also play a specific role. I often play the devil's advocate, and I tell people straight out, I'm like, just so you know, this is the devil's advocate speaking here, but what if? And, I will ask a question that completely takes the opposite view of whatever they're saying. And either yourself or have students post a little summary of the discussion. Like, what is the takeaway? What did we finish up with at the end of this? What did we learn? What did we come to a conclusion about? What did we decide as a group? I think this kind of collaborative learning and this collaborative building of knowledge is really important. And sometimes they don't see that unless you sort of tell them that it's there. And once they see a couple of examples, they can often do it for themselves. But sometimes it takes a little bit of, this is what we did. So they can say, oh, well, cool. I learned that. I did that, which is always good.
So that's what we've put together. And I think one of the things that Kim said in that last slide, or just the language that she used naturally, because she does, is talking about what are our key takeaways from this discussion? What did we learn? And I think that's something that we can model for our students, or that instructors can model for students by being as engaged in the discussion as they hope that students are, right? So I don't want my students all replying to everybody else's posts. I want them to be an equal participant in the discussion. So that's what I try to model for them, that I'm part of the conversation too. I can be surprised by what people think. I can say, oh, that's such a great idea. I've never thought about it that way. Or have you thought about this? So I, in our participation, being very careful to avoid what Kim said of, being the teacher in terms of being the evaluater, the assessor. That can come in the grade, right? In our participation in the discussion, we are a partner. In the Paulo Freire sense, right? We are teacher students along with our student/teachers. And I think that the comment that Kim and I both get from students often about our discussion boards is that they they have never had an experience where they felt like the teacher was so engaged in their discussion, that the teacher really cared about what was happening in those discussions. And honestly, I mean, using that spreadsheet approach that Kim detailed makes it very manageable as a teacher. You know, generally I respond to about 20 to 25% of students in each discussion. So it's not too onerous. I'm not killing myself. I have time to also write my own Dear Therapist letter and then see who responds to me. And I try to do a new one each time. So it's fun. I mean, it's really enjoyable. So at the end of the class, I don't feel like, oh, I did what I had to do and I put those discussions in, but it really is the heart of the online class. And then often it helps students, it leads right into the assessments later on. Thanks so much, Greta. Other questions or concerns?
Just two more things I'll say. Two things just to piggyback off what Jen just said. First of all, if you were teaching in a face-to-face class, you would, I think, not probably put a question on the board and then just walk out of the room and say, good luck. Hope that goes well for you. So in the same way that you would not do that, you would not do that in an online discussion. Also, I think it's very important if I'm asking my students to post, let's say 3 days a week or whatever it is, then I need to be in there 3 days a week because that's only fair, right? If I need to model the behavior that I want them to do. And if I don't want them to post at 11:59 on Sunday night, then I should not be posting at 11:59 on Sunday night either, because nobody can reply to my posts. So I think it's only fair that I do what I'm asking them to do. That's it. That's all I was gonna say.
Well, thank you all so much. We've kept you a little over, but thank you so much for being here. And we will stick around if you have more questions. We will share the slides and obviously the recording will be available as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.